Welcome back to season 3 of Titans of Food Service. I'm your host, Nick Portillo, and I'm continuing my journey across America in 50 weeks tour where I travel to each state to highlight a true titan of food service. This week, I'm deep in the heart of Texas, and I'm excited to introduce my guest, Dr. Emily Williams Knight, the president and CEO of the Texas Restaurant Association. With over 50,000 restaurants employing over 1.3 million Texans and generating over $70 billion in sales, Dr. Knight is at the forefront of one of the most critical industries in the state. Since taking on this leadership role back in 2019, she has been a powerhouse advocate for Texas restaurants, navigating them through the unprecedented challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic. She also secured vital support of both the state and federal levels, ensuring the survival and continued growth of the food service industry within her state. With more than 20 years of national and global leadership experience, Dr. Knight's resume is as impressive as her results. Before leading the Texas Restaurant Association, she held key roles in higher education, hospitality, and international student recruitment, including as president of Kendall College, where she expanded access to culinary and hospitality education. Her career has been defined by advocating for technical education and workforce development, always striving to elevate the industries she serves. In our conversation, you're going to really feel her passion. And she actually talks about wanting to be in the food and hospitality industry very early on in her life. She grew up in a military family. We talk about the lessons that she learned and how that shaped her as a person here today, and many, many other things. It's a really, really fun, really cool conversation that I have with her. I think you're really going to enjoy. But before I dive into my conversation with her, I want to talk about the state of Texas and the food service scene that is so unique to them. I do this with every state, give just a quick little background on the state. So Texas, it boasts one of the most diverse and vibrant culinary landscapes in the U.S., from iconic barbecue joints to Tex-Mex to fine dining establishments in large metro cities like Houston, Austin, Dallas. Texas, it's a melting pot of flavors that reflect its rich cultural heritage. We even talk about in the conversation that there's a lot of importing and exporting out of the state of Texas, being the eighth largest economy in the world. Texas is home to famous restaurants such as Franklin Barbecue in Austin, the Big Texan Steak Ranch in Amarillo, and Papado in Houston. Those are just a few renowned names in the Texas food service industry. The state is also a major agricultural hub, being one of the leading producers of beef, cotton, and more, making its farm-to-table movement particularly strong. Now, without further ado, let's go ahead and welcome Dr. Emily Williams Knight. Emily, welcome to the Titans of Food Service podcast. I appreciate you taking time to come and meet
Thank you
with me.
so much.
So I could tell. I know we talked a little off camera. You're on the go here, on your way to Florida, correct?
Yes, back to Florida.
All right, very nice, very nice. So tell me, do you follow college football at all? I know that University of Texas, there in Austin, has risen to the top here in college football.
Yeah, it may surprise people, but believe it or not, so I was at the Bama game this weekend. I have one freshman daughter at Alabama rowing and another freshman at A&M. So we're in the mix,
Okay,
but we certainly support A&M and Alabama, maybe more than Texas, but we do like our Texas football team.
I love that. I love that. So tell me, maybe a little background on yourself. How did you get into the food business?
You know, it always surprises people, but I go back to the 3rd grade, which is really when my, I guess, journey started, or my dream of being in the industry. So, raised in a military family, and if you know anything about that, everything is the same. You're on a base, you have the same cars, the same houses, your parents go to work. My dad was a submariner, and one night a week, a new show came on called Hotel, and Connie Selica and James Brolin worked in this fictitious hotel in San Francisco, and to me, it was a world that was so foreign from the world I lived in. And I obviously had a great life and a great childhood, but it was just amazing and luxury. And what I loved was this idea of service, that they would just take care of people and treat them like they were in their own home. And so in the 3rd grade, I declared to my parents that I was going to go into hospitality, which I didn't really even know what that meant.
Wow.
But that's when I made I've never deviated. I went to my undergraduate in hospitality. I went to work in Key West, both for Pizza Hut, which is where I cut my teeth as an assistant manager, and then on to Marriott. But really, for me, it's been a lifetime of wanting to be in what I would call the service and hospitality industry.
Of all the people that I've interviewed, I've done about almost 100 of these conversations at this point, maybe 90 to 100 of them. Most people, they want to be not in the food business growing
Right.
up, or they don't even realize that it's a thing, unless there's familial ties to it in some way. Maybe their parents started the
Yeah.
restaurant that they worked in, that they currently still work in, or maybe the distributor, whatever it may be. But I think that's really cool that you wanted to be in the food business, in the hospitality
Absolutely.
business from a very early age.
Absolutely. My first job was shoveling stalls to get enough money to ride horses and learn how to horseback ride, and right after that, at 15, I went into to a restaurant and realized they thought I was a better busser than a server. Maybe that was,
Sure.
but I just have always loved it, and I think I've loved the service side of it and have been really unique in building a career that wasn't just in operations and running the restaurant, but every part and facet, it feels like all around that ecosystem, which is what I try to educate people on, is that it's not working in a restaurant that's super valuable, but it's a much bigger ecosystem, that we're part of.
Oh, 100%. You think about all of the different inputs that are there, from production to the restaurant side to even working casinos or hotels, or the food service industry is gigantic, and,
I mean,
and the
there's food
scope of it.
science and food technology, food agriculture, marketing, finance. Look at me, I was a college president, and then in with really strong programs in hospitality, and then now I lobby and make sure that restaurants can operate successfully. So I think that's the education part that I didn't know as a
Sure.
youngster. I thought I was gonna go make everyone's life great and I was gonna go run a hotel one day, but my career has gone back and forth, which I think I really want the next generation to understand that there's so many options when you get the training development to work in our industry.
Oh, for sure, for sure. When you were growing up, you mentioned that your dad was in the military. And you lived
Yeah.
on bases. Which base did you live on?
Mhm. So I was living in Japan when I guess I was about to be coming to this world, and so my mom flew back, had me in the US. I lived my first 3 years in Yokohama, Japan. Then we
Wow.
lived in Connecticut. My dad was a submariner, so he went on and was, 5, 6-month deployments. A big piece, I think, of my toughness of being in the industry came from being with a father that was deployed for most of my young life. And then my
Yeah.
dad did tours in Scotland, Virginia, DC, and Maryland. And the Scottish tours, we did the summers in Scotland. And my mom kept us stateside, and as she built her career from being also in the Navy on to becoming a community college president. And so I sort of had two parents that
Wow.
worked incredibly hard to give us stability in a military family of 30 years, but also watched my mom build a remarkable career making really tough choices, right? And how to balance being a mom and a college executive. So I think that military upbringing is very much the grittiness that I get, I think, to work in this industry on a day to day basis.
Eh, One, that's so cool. My grandfather was stationed in Japan when my dad
Oh,
was growing up, and he was in the Air Force. And I
sure.
think Okinawa, I think, is where
Yes.
he was.
Yep.
Um, and I know that he spent a lot. He worked on cargo planes, as kind of loading things into the cargo planes. And in his
Oh,
time there,
wow.
he became a pretty good martial artist. I don't know, for
Oh,
whatever
that's so
reason, he
cool.
really got into martial arts, and I think he became pretty successful at that.
I
And
love
then,
that.
yeah, so it was really cool. And yeah, during the Korean War, he was in the Korean War, and the station there
Heroes. I
throughout
mean,
other parts of his life. Yeah.
definitely heroes. My dad, unfortunately, is in Arlington, but I also say fortunately that we laid him to rest in Arlington National Cemetery 2 years ago, and you walk those
Oh,
grounds and, as a military dependent or not, and you just realize the sacrifice and commitment from so many, and I think anyone who comes up through a military family just has a different toughness about them. I mean, you're just expected to move and to be resilient, and there are not a lot of tears because you're expected to just get the job done, and I think that's even when I hire and I find someone that's prior military, I take a second look because I know the sacrifice that we make in the service industry is nowhere near what they've had to make, but they've still been willing to put that work in. And that work ethic is so transferable to us in our sector.
you've mentioned the words toughness and grittiness, when talking about your upbringing, and tell me a little bit more about that. What does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for me, it's there's when you're in a military family, right? The government decides what happens to you. They decide if it's your mom or your dad, that when they get deployed, how long they're gone for, when you're going to move. In some cases for us, how much stuff you could take. So there were moves where based on your rank is how many pounds of things you could move. So that may be letting go of things that you love. It would mean that you would wake up like I did at Charles Barnum Elementary School, and a submarine was moved from New London to Kings Bay, and half of your friends are gone. And so I think that constant disruption and that constance that there's always service before self, I think that that's bred into you as a military dependent, that it's always something bigger than you. And in our roles, and I think about my job now leading the association, is that it has to be bigger than me. It's not about meeting Emily's needs. It's about meeting the needs of the folks that we serve, the 60,000 restaurants across Texas. And I think that as much as I think about my own leadership style really gets developed through all my years of being a leader and those that leaders I followed, I do think that the underground and underpinning of always putting others before yourself is something that is rooted in being in a military family for sure. And then I married a
Yeah.
military officer, so I feel like not only did I, which many people do, is you realize it's a very tough life, and so you decide to sign up for it again, which is what we tend to do. But I do think that just makes you a better selfless leader and maybe more
Yeah.
humble, which is a blessing when you're serving others, especially in a kind of a influential capacity, and not that you're running their restaurant, but you're their voice. And I think that's helped me a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I can't even imagine what that would be like, right? You mentioning, your friends. One day you wake up one morning and they're gone. It probably, all
Yeah.
of the different life lessons you grow up probably pretty quick. You learn how to become
Yes.
adaptable, and all of these different things that many people or a lot of people may not learn until later on in life or may never learn. So you're getting
Right.
lessons and experiences in your life that make you who you are here today, which is an exceptional
100%.
person.
Yeah, 100%, and realizing that everybody has value. I think in the service,
Yeah.
you are thrown into so many new environments, and go make friends today and go to this event, or your father leaves, and so then you're going to see where he is, and the idea that you will find value in every single person on this earth is something else I think you get from being in the military, is that everyone has a gift and everyone has something to give the world. And so you look for that because you're trying to connect when you're constantly new or constantly new environment. And so I find myself, that's where I thrive the best, right? Is meeting other people and finding out what they, who they are, what can they bring to the table, and maybe then how I can help them or meet them where they are. I think that's something else that comes from that military upbringing that you don't ask for as a child. You're born into it. But I think if you
Okay.
make the most of it, you look for the best parts of it, and that's what we can't fail to recognize. I think in this country is those people and those families that have given
100%.
up so much, right, to protect our freedoms.
100%. Amazing. So tell me, how did you end up in Texas?
This is a great story. So never thought that I would live in Texas, right? So my formative years and my later years in high school and college were all in Boston.
Okay.
I married a Coast Guard officer who I met in high school. He was at the Coast Guard Academy. So his first duty station was New York, and that was great. I was finishing college. And then we went to Key West, Florida, which could be any young person's dream, right? To live in Key West in a beautiful home. And he was doing a lot of, drug interdiction and really cool stuff that, are important to the country. And then it was time to sort of decide what was the next move. And looking at the duty station list, it was he had been raised in the Army, I had been raised in the Navy, and maybe we should build a life outside of that. And so I went to Pennsylvania, and that's really when I guess, built my career in the space. Was deciding to kind of figure out, which direction do I want to head. And through that process, I kind of took an education track. I met an individual, did not actually meet the individual. The individual saw me speaking at a conference. He was an incredibly wealthy investor from Texas. To me at the time, and I don't ever want to offend anyone, but if you grew up in New England, Texas is, cows and sparkly and the Dallas Cowboys. And it's just so far from what I knew. And after about a 6 month, I call it courtship, he flew my husband down, who took one look at Dallas and said, wow, what an amazing life. And so when my twin daughters were 4, we made the leap to come join him. And the role was really taking US higher ed into developing markets in Latin America, which I loved because, again, I'm, helping people completely outside of hospitality, but still in the education
Yeah.
space. And we landed in Dallas, and my career sort of from that point just accelerated into a global career and led me to run the association, which is another whole story about how that happened. But that was the link to Texas, was someone that I had never met, thought I could add value to his business, and just didn't stop until I said yes. And he was a great leader and mentor, and helped me make a big career change. I had been with my prior firm for, I guess, 12 years. Never thought I would leave ever.
Wow. I mean, what a big, to pick up your life and move to Dallas, Texas. I can see how, yeah, your view of Texas for sure, right? Not ever living
Yeah,
there. Being born and raised in California, when I think of Texas, I think of it probably very similar. A lot of cows,
right.
open land. It's probably pretty hot there. I mean, I've been a few
Yes.
times, but those are kind of the
Oil.
things that I think about. Oil, that's right.
Yeah, yeah, but then you
No,
realize once you're here, it's so much more, right? It's so much more. From the outside, it was a very, my family was on the East Coast, and so it was a really big move. But again, we were used to it, so we're used to just packing up and going, and so it didn't seem as scary. Maybe because the both of us were raised in families where that was just what we did.
yeah. So you mentioned this person found you at a speaking engagement,
Yeah.
and he liked you for whatever reason that was. Maybe
Yes.
some there's a lot of people listening, right? That are maybe they're in sales, or maybe they're in or presentation. They need to do presentations, or maybe need to do speeches. And I heard you mention earlier that you do lobbying as well. So you
Yes.
have to be you have to be comfortable being probably uncomfortable, right? Being in front of
Very.
people, making talking to people who you've never met before, maybe large audiences.
Yes.
When it comes to preparing for a speech and giving a speech, what are some tips, tricks that you use to help you feel comfortable, to help you deliver your message?
Yeah, that's such a good question. First and foremost, it's practice, right? It's practice, practice, practice. Whenever you can get an audience, big or small. If it's at a family dinner, agree to give the prayer or the toast, right? If it's at a group event, agree to summarize what you're going to do. Anytime you have an opportunity to speak in front of more than one person from the earliest age, you need to take that, because that's how you get better. Because I think public speaking isn't really about the fear, it's really about the ability to connect. And the more comfortable you are, I think the more authentic self you are. And you only can get comfortable through practice. I think, I reflect back when I was teaching at a community college at one point in my career, I was teaching the sales course. And my job was, and it was back at the time, it was like Motorola folks and a lot of the cell phone salespeople. And they were all coming thinking that they could take this one class on the art of selling with me and become more effective salespeople. And what I learned through having a textbook on that is that foundation number one is really about doing it more than anything else that you do, right? So, what are all those opportunities? I think second is learning if you are a scripted or unscripted person. I am much better unscripted. If you give me something to read, I'm not my authentic self. I feel more like, I always say, a horse in a barn. I can't get out. I am much better if I understand the purpose of the audience, if I understand why they're there and what they want to get out of me being on stage, right? So always asking before you speak to a group, who are these people? Why did they come to this event? And what are they hoping to get out of my session? And I think if you agree to speak, you need to have those answers. And when you get on stage, if you're a scripted person, then you have a script that makes sure that you leave people with something that is tangible. Maybe it's something they can implement. Maybe it's a question that you ask them to go back and answer and contact you through LinkedIn independently. And if it's not, if it's something that you think you're going to deliver without something scripted, it's really understanding the flow and your comfortableness with the content, right? You cannot get up there and wing it. That is not an option. But you
Mhm.
certainly can also over prepare. And that's when it becomes canned and it's not enjoyable. So I think it's really understanding your style, how you connect with people, getting as much practice as possible, and then realizing, don't be afraid to say, listen, I don't want to have a teleprompter. I personally never use them. I do most of my presentations by memory because I've done them enough.
Wow.
And knowing what your style is and being okay with it, I think, is the best advice. Because you can really be set up for failure. If you're a microphone person and they have you on a lavalier walking the stage, if you like a podium and the podium isn't there, right? Figure out how you like to best deliver it. And then that's what you ask for every time you speak.
I heard from somebody one time when it comes to making presentations and speeches as well, stay in your lane, stay in the things that you know and understand pretty well. If I had to go out and talk about the state of Texas, I've never lived there. I don't know anything about it. So how
Right.
comfortable am I going to be presenting how great the state of Texas is? Now, if
That's
I
right.
talk about California, specifically Orange County, where I grew up, hey, I may have more comfortability in doing that. When you prepare for these unscripted speeches, right, where you memorize or you learn the content or what you're going to say, how do you, let's say it's like a 5 minute or 10 minute 20 30 minute
Mhm.
presentation, how do you remember everything? How do you keep that in your mind like that?
I don't know. No. I think, this is just funny because people are like, "How did you just do that without" I think if I think about it, I read every morning. So I think one of the things, if you want to be an expert in your area, is that you have to have a diverse set of resources that you're learning every day. So when I get up really early, whether I listen to the daily podcast on the market, so I can understand how the overall market is doing in context of the sector. I have very specific publications from the industry that come into my inbox. I scan those. I know what's happening. Chipotle is going to go into Mediterranean. This one was sold, and you're constantly filing that away. But if you're not a good steward of the overall market that you represent, or maybe it's the product you represent within that market, you can't be as effective because the most effective speakers don't talk about one thing. They talk about what that one thing is in the context of something much broader. And what you
Mm,
bring to an audience is your ability to connect that thought to a much bigger either situation or environment, right? So if I'm talking about the restaurant industry this month and sales are flat, I want to be able to describe why, right? Well, actually, sales are flat, but Florida and North Carolina and Georgia are driving more than that negative increase because of the hurricanes. Therefore, the overall market is actually in good shape. And here in Texas, we were positive. And so if you're not aware of the broader landscape or the broader industry because you're not reading, you're not up to date on, the measurements of what would be important to your audience, you're just delivering a boring presentation, right? So I think by being knowledgeable is you're constantly reading and you're constantly learning and you're filing it away. You're hitting LinkedIn for 15 minutes a day, scheduled in your calendar. You're part of all the top groups. You can see what the trends are. And then you start to just connect in your own brain. I've heard this thing about the, credit card swipe fees 10 times this week. Maybe I want to go look a little more into that. Is this something I should be aware of? And I think that curiosity is something no matter where you are in your career, you have to be curious and want to know the why. Ask yourself every day, why? Why is this happening? Why to me is like the biggest word. And I'm curious. I want to know what's happening. I want to be able to explain to people in a layman's terms why the industry is good or bad or what things they should be thinking about. And also take the noise out of the social media channel for them, which is yes, there's a lot of noise around this. There's a lot of noise around the
mhm.
election. Put your head
Yeah.
down. It's uncontrollable. Do your part and vote, and then we're going to move on. But if you don't have the context, you can't do that. And it only comes through reading and listening.
Speaking of the election, and the nature of your job, is it more
Mhm.
busy here in election year in 2024, maybe 2020, than it would be in a non-election year for you?
Yeah. So for us, it's interesting. The Texas legislature only meets every other year. So for us, the busiest time is coming up. And so we're currently drafting bills, we're signing bill authors, we're figuring out with our constituents and our board, what are those key state issues and local issues that we want to work on in this very short period of time, just over 100 days in for 89th session. And so the spring will be extraordinarily busy. Right now is busy because we're thinking about what are the final candidates we want to back? Who are those people that we think are going to be very pro restaurant and pro business? We have a lot of sit downs right now with potential elected officials talking about and educating them on our space. I think restaurants are so ubiquitous, but in the state of Texas, and I guess it mirrors every state, we're the largest private sector employer, right? I mean, we have
Mhm.
incredible number of people, almost 1.4 million employees working in restaurants and food service.
Wow.
Then you add up 106 billion in economic impact and over almost 60,000 units. You can just imagine that scale is so important to elected officials. And by sitting down with them either before they're elected or right after and educating them on the importance of the space and what matters to us, all that work is happening now. And so I would say a state like Connecticut, a state like Texas is never not busy. If, right now I'm dealing with a noise ordinance in one city and a health issue in one, and we have 4 golf tournaments going to raise money, and we have a pack event. I mean, we are we're the 7th, 8th largest economy in the world, and so there's always something, but right now is really the preparation for the next legislative session that's taking a lot of time. And the election, I'd like to try to tell people, we get told that candidate A or candidate B, one is great for us and one is not great for us. At the end of the day, so much touches restaurants that, I'm less concerned about that. I'm more concerned about how we drive our issue home no matter who's in office. And so for us, it's really about being very bipartisan,
Yeah.
educating our members on what we think the platforms of both parties are, and then from that point, using the results and the deck that we're handed essentially to ensure that we keep protecting and advancing restaurants.
Amazing. So when it comes to election, does the Texas Restaurant Association, will they choose a candidate, or no? You're pretty. You're trying to stay.
We
Uh, you're trying to stay neutral, essentially.
Correct, correct. We try to stay neutral. We do very few and far between endorsements directly, but we do have a PAC, and our PAC will, the PAC board, which is a separate sanctioned board, will look at all the candidates' profiles, meet with a lot of candidates, and then decide to put money behind those candidates that we feel like would be the best choice for the industry. And that's Republican or Democratic. And we have a lot of issues that fall on both sides of the aisle, things like childcare, right? Things like workforce development, huge for us because our state is growing so quickly, and that tends to bring both sides of the aisle together. So we like to say that everybody should love restaurants, and our issues matter because we're essentially critical feeding infrastructure for the entire state. And without restaurants, we learned in COVID, we can't feed everyone. So we all need to care about restaurants, but we're very careful to stay down the middle and really focus on those candidates that want to help us keep the restaurant industry and the regulations in a way that helps them succeed and grow.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about in your normal day to day? What does that look like? I know right now you're preparing for next spring, upcoming, but in your the day to day life of you, what does that look
Mhm.
like?
I think maybe what I love about it is that every day is different, and I might say that respectfully, right? I mean, I just came back last week. Or 2 weeks ago, I was at the National Restaurant Association board meeting, which are incredible partners, talking about all federal policy, meeting with the largest chain leaders in the nation, talking about what's happening in Texas. I then flew to Portugal where I just flew home on, I guess, Thursday. I met with, we had 40 of our board members over in Spain and Portugal doing we call it travel with the TRA, exposing these restaurant owners to other cultures and food and potential partners. We did Italy last year. I'm flying down to meet with one of our really important chain, one of the biggest restaurant brands that we have in the country, and talk about policy and employees and how we take care of employees. In the meantime, in the background, we have a large foundation that's fundraising for all of the hurricanes. We have 25,000 students learning restaurant management in high schools across Texas and manage those programs, writing all the policy, writing all the bills. We have the second largest trade show outside of Illinois that runs every summer to board me. So I say that the gift is I have the most amazing team, and that's from the leadership team all the way down. It's 26 strong, which always surprises people that it's a very small team to cross this geography. And we have 23 chapters. So at any given point, a chapter in El Paso is doing something. McAllen just had a big skeet shoot and dinner last weekend, about to have their golf event and their gala in Dallas. And so we're constantly making sure that relationships at the, I guess, city level are really solid because that's where a lot of advocacy issues happen. So we juggle a tremendous amount, but I'm only able to do that because of the people that I get to work around,
Yeah,
and they're just so good at what they do. And my job as a leader is to empower and get out of the way, and
yeah,
allow them to run, and they just continue to prove their commitment, I think, to the industry and to me and to themselves. And that's the best thing you could ask for as a leader.
yeah. That's a big job. I mean, how what you did you mention your economy is the sixth or eighth largest in the
Yeah, we're
world?
the 8th largest economy in the world, so bigger than
Mm,
Australia, we're bigger than Canada. From an export standpoint, we do a lot of international work with Mexico and others because you can imagine as a
mm,
trading partner,
yeah,
we really feel like the cultural influence between both food and alcohol is such a natural bridge for us to improve relations and to work more closely together to grow both of our travel economies. We love when people travel because they have to eat and sleep, and we provide one of those. And so we work a lot, believe it or not, internationally, which for me personally is probably what I missed the most from my prior job, which was totally global. And so I still get a flavor by doing some of that connecting, because I think that's where food is such a uniter, right? It's the
It
one
is.
thing that we can all agree on around a table. And so that those relationships and taking our board abroad and educating so many of them and bringing some of them for the first time outside of the US, is so rewarding. And it makes us just all better business people.
Yeah, absolutely. What about looking into the distance of things that you still want to achieve that not yet achieved? What would those be?
I want to continue growing the trade show. I think to me, the idea of co-locating with other really interesting smaller restaurant shows is very important, right? How do we not just have this where you walk by and meet with our incredible exhibitors, but the education, right? Can we continue to build that place where you come for answers? You don't come to ask questions, you come for answers. You have your question, maybe your questions around how are you integrating artificial intelligence into your business model. And I think about all the independents, which surprises people that, more than 70% of the restaurants in Texas are independent restaurants. So they're not part of a big ecosystem. So how do we bring them the answers? How do we, leverage all the incredible chain innovation and connect it? And so I really see this as the place once a year that I can build and grow with the team and make it the place you come for answers. I think that's one. I think two is to continue to grow membership.
Mhm.
Associations, our parents joined them because it was a duty and an honor. And that's not the case anymore. So really continuing to think about, what does the restaurant operator need today? What's going to convince them to join an association, or really what I call is this network of people where they can learn from and work together and solve problems together. And I think third, I think it's really positioning ourselves as, you cannot run a restaurant in Texas unless you are part of the Texas Restaurant Association. So every single restaurant brand that opens, that brand is going to be a member, because they cannot successfully operate without us. So that indispensability, I think that's the
Mhm.
ultimate goal in my tenure, which I think I have about 3 to 4 years in my tenure. I think that those are those goals. So whoever takes on this role when I depart one day or whenever that might be, I want to leave a legacy of not only the financial footing to keep the association for the next 87 years, but also make sure that that impact, that those restaurants in our state feel so supported. And if you have a great idea and you want to take your grandma's lasagna and start a business, that you have every advantage possible by doing it in Texas. That's my dream.
That's amazing. How cool is that?
It's
Fantastic.
amazing. You feel so great. Even talking about it, sometimes I just feel really grateful. We just can't forget the faces behind these restaurants. I mean, they take such risks. They take more risk than I have in me. I'm always humbled when someone starts and opens a restaurant. Think about that. It's one of the hardest businesses to run, because
It is.
you're delivering a service that is also perishable, that is a product and a service simultaneously. It's just hard. And these, if you have obviously spent a lot of time with restaurant people, the
Mhm.
employees and folks that own restaurants are the salt of the earth and the people you want to spend time with, and frankly, you want to fight for, because they're just great people.
I feel like in the restaurant business or the food service industry that we have to have more entrepreneurs maybe than any other industry that there is.
Yes.
People, whether individuals or families or corporations or whatever it is, you starting these restaurants or these operations, like it takes a lot, right? And they take a
Oh,
risk on themselves, and to have that support of folks like yourself and the TRA, that goes a long way for sure.
yeah. I think that's just the financial losses. One of the probably what still bothers me the most about the pandemic was the phone calls and emails. I still get
Mhm.
emotional about the loss. And I think we were very fortunate. We partnered really closely with the governor and his team. He did a remarkable job of getting us open. We were open very quickly, but the financial losses and the personal losses were so significant. And for those of us that sat in those seats every day and sometimes 20 hours a day for weeks on end, you'll never forget that. You can't ever forget that, those calls, those emotions, and it's really tough. And so I think it does two things for you, right? You either go, this is too hard, and you move on, or you say, if I can do something every day with my team to make those losses less, to reduce the number of losses, but also to maybe give more hope and more direction because we can provide more resources to them, that's a mission worth fighting for. And I think if you're going to work in a nonprofit, you have to be mission focused, and you almost have to feel the heart of the people you're serving, at least for me and my team. And if you don't, you just won't put the work in, and you won't fight like you need to fight when you're in a crowded lobby environment. You got to make the restaurant industry stand up before other needed industries. And you can only do that, I think, if you just care authentically, really deeply.
Like your passion, it definitely shines through. When we were talking, just throughout our whole conversation, I could just feel it, and I
Yeah,
really
I
enjoyed
love
our conversation. I appreciate you taking time to do this, even as you're on the
it.
run right now, on the
Yeah, and
go.
I'm so sorry for this
And
terrible background. It's
oh
like,
my gosh, don't even worry about it.
but the airport's too loud, so
I call it the mobile office.
yeah, exactly. I don't usually do this. But I knew the airport was gonna be too loud, so I thank you for being flexible with me.
Oh, of course, of course. I just want to say thank you so much for coming on and talking with me and
It's
sharing
great.
about yourself and your story, your upbringing, what you're up to with the TRA. Really, really impressive things. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much for meeting with me too. I enjoyed it.